The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joanne Aransibia, and I'm Head of Marketing at AFTA. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar centred around the JobKeeper Payment. This wage subsidy scheme is a fantastic initiative by the federal government, and we believe that all AFTA members, despite their various business structures, should be eligible for the JobKeeper Payment. We understand that everybody's circumstances are slightly different, and as a result, we have received numerous questions around the JobKeeper Payment. So the purpose of today's webinar is to address some of the key topics that most people have had questions about. And to take us through the content, I have with me Courtney Duddleston, Head of Strategy and Finance. Now, before I hand over to Courtney, just some short housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and if you go to the AFTA website, you'll find a handy promo button on the home page, and if you click that, it will take you through to all the webinar recordings. You'll notice next to the AFTA webinar button, we also have a COVID-19 industry update. So if you hit that button, it will take you through to all the updates that we have, including a dedicated page on the JobKeeper Payment itself. You are all in listen-only mode, but of course, like every webinar, we do invite questions. So please use the toolbox to ask any of those questions that you might have. I'll now hand you over to Courtney to take us through some of the content.
Well, thanks, Jo, and good afternoon, everyone. We really do appreciate you taking time today to join us on this webinar. This is now our third webinar focused on the JobKeeper Payment, and it is really great to see such a high level of engagement from our members on this. So today, we will run through a quick recap of what JobKeeper is. We've then compiled some of the most common questions that we have received from members over the last few weeks, most of which do tend to revolve around those who are self-employed and questions around how JobKeeper interacts with annual leave and those employees who have been stood down. I will also go through some of the JobKeeper changes to the Fair Work Act that were announced last week. And we've also had some questions around enforcement and compliance of JobKeeper, and so we can address these too. What is the JobKeeper Payment? Well, the JobKeeper Payment is a payment made to eligible businesses affected by the coronavirus to support them in retaining employees. Eligible businesses that elect to participate will receive a payment of $1,500 per fortnight per eligible employee to support the people they've employed as of 1st of March who are retained in employment. They are then required to pass on the full $1,500 per fortnight before tax. So we've got some great resources on the AFTA website, including 2 dedicated JobKeeper webinars, which go through exactly how the payment works and who is an eligible employer and employee. If you haven't already watched these, I would strongly suggest that you jump online and view these, as we do go into depth around how the payment works for those who are earning below the $1,500 per fortnight and those who are earning above $1,500 per fortnight, along with any obligations for an employer such as superannuation. And I do hope by now everyone on this webinar has elected to participate in the scheme. You do this by registering your interest on the ATO website, and we expect in the next week or so the ATO will start to communicate with businesses and begin confirming eligibility now that the legislation has passed. So we've included some key dates around the JobKeeper Payment, which you might find useful to note down. The JobKeeper Payment will commence from the 30th of March this year, with the first payment made to employers in the first week of May. This first payment will be backdated to the commencement date of the scheme. Now, we do realise that there is a time lag here and that cash flow is a serious issue for our members who have absolutely no revenue coming in right now. and will find it difficult to pay wages in advance of the ATO payment in arrears. The current guidance is that those businesses may want to speak to their bank to discuss short-term loan options available. And a number of states have also announced grants available to businesses affected by COVID-19. So in particular, if you are a New South Wales or Victoria business and have not yet applied for a grant, then please reach out to us so that we can help guide you in this process. And finally, the JobKeeper payment will be available for the period until the 27th of September this year. So what does an employer have to do to make a claim and when? I've set out the 6 steps of what an employer is required to do in order to receive the subsidy. So step 1, the employer needs to register interest in the JobKeeper payment on the ATO website. The ATO website indicated that those who register will receive relevant updates on the scheme. So I expect everyone will have done this by now, so we can tick that one off. Step 2, the ATO will contact those who have registered and issue a form that employers will need to complete to notify the Commissioner that they want to participate in the scheme. We expect the ATO will be issuing this very soon and will require the approved forms to be submitted by the 26th of April. Next, an employer will need to obtain a notification from each employee in writing confirming the employee's consent to being included in the employer's JobKeeper application. The employer will then need to provide details of eligible employees for each fortnight to the ATO in the approved form. The ATO will use single touch payroll data to assist in the process by pre-population. Next, the employer will need to notify eligible employees within 7 days of each fortnightly claim for the subsidy. So this could be something as simple as a pay slip. And lastly, the employer will be required to report monthly to the Commissioner by the 7th of each month on its GST turnover for the previous month and its projected GST turnover for the coming month. And for those who are self-employed and do not have employees, therefore do not use single touch payroll, the ATO will require a declaration of business activity. Now, we've also had a number of queries from members regarding the eligibility by using GST turnover. AFTA's in the process of writing directly to the Coronavirus Business Liaison Unit, or the BLU. We don't think it's their intention, well, it's certainly not their intention that travel might not be included, but we're making it very clear that the GST rule does not work in the travel industry, and we'll be lobbying hard to make sure that the travel agents can still claim on JobKeeper. So I will run through some of the most common questions that we've received from members about JobKeeper. So where a business was not in operation a year earlier, or where turnover a year earlier was not representative of the usual turnover, the Tax Commissioner will have the discretion to consider additional information that the business can provide to establish that they have been adversely affected by the impacts of the coronavirus. For example, the travel industry is highly cyclical, and your business may have been booming the last financial year. Your turnover for year to date may be higher than last financial year, so you've experienced an increase in sales. However, say from 1st of April until the foreseeable future at least, you will experience no revenue. This would still make you eligible, and we would encourage you to apply for the scheme. So let's say your business is a partnership. The ATO has determined that only one partner can be nominated to receive a JobKeeper payment along with any eligible employees, however, noting that a partner cannot be an employee. Now, we know that the government has made it clear that the line has to be drawn somewhere, and they won't be looking to expand the parameters of the JobKeeper payment, such as including both partners in a partnership. Those ineligible partners are encouraged to apply for the Job Seeker payment, which also includes the coronavirus supplement. So as an employer, you are required to pay PAYG withholding and superannuation on the JobKeeper payment. And we did run through this in length in our last webinars, but I will go through it again as it is really important that employers are aware of their obligations. So employers must pay a minimum of $1,500 per fortnight to your eligible employees, withholding income tax as appropriate. So if you were just paying your employee the minimum $1,500 JobKeeper payment and not topping up this payment, then the PAYG withholding amount worked out to be about $192 per fortnight that you would withhold and remit to the ATO. Remember that the $1,500 per fortnight per employee is a before tax amount, and it is taxable income for the employee. Where an employee is paid more than $1,500 per fortnight, your superannuation obligations will not change. Where an employee is having their wages topped up to $1,500 per fortnight by JobKeeper, it's up to you as the employer if you want to pay superannuation on any additional wages paid by the scheme. And if the employee has been stood down and is receiving JobKeeper from you, then you are not required to pay superannuation guarantee payments on this. So we've had a couple of questions around how JobKeeper interacts with workers' compensation, and so I thought it would be worthwhile addressing this for everyone here today. If your employee is currently receiving workers' compensation, are they eligible for JobKeeper? Well, if they are still working, say on reduced hours, then they would be an eligible employee for JobKeeper. However, if they're currently not working due to incapacity and are being supported through workers' compensation arrangements, then they are not eligible for the JobKeeper payment. So it's worth noting. So as part of the JobKeeper legislation, a number of amendments have been made to the Fair Work Act. These changes to the Fair Work Act that form part of the legislative package will enable employers to manage their workforce more flexibly over the next 6 months. So the new changes are temporary and will end on the 28th of September this year, a day after JobKeeper is due to cease. The new provisions enable employers who qualify for the JobKeeper scheme to give directions called JobKeeper enabling directions to their employees. So in certain circumstances, this means that employers can temporarily stand down an employee, can change an employee's usual duties, and change an employee's location of work. The new provisions also enable employers who qualify JobKeeper to make arrangements with their employees to change their days and times of work and take annual leave in certain circumstances. And I would encourage everyone on here today to visit the Fair Work website, where there's some really easy to understand information around the JobKeeper changes to the Fair Work Act. And we will make sure that we send through this link when we send out a copy of this recording to everyone this afternoon. So what are JobKeeper directions? Well, under the temporary Fair Work Act changes, employers can issue directions or JobKeeper enabling directions to change current employment arrangements, such as reduced work hours or days, undertake alternative duties, or work at an alternative location. Employees cannot unreasonably refuse a request to work different days or times to their ordinary hours or days, or take their accrued annual leave. So let's go through some of the more specifics around JobKeeper enabling directions. So do you have to give your employee notice of a JobKeeper direction? Well, the answer to this is yes. You must give your employee at least 3 days written notice before you give a JobKeeper direction. You must also consult with the employee about the JobKeeper direction, and we would strongly encourage you to keep a written record of the consultation. Another important point to note is that you cannot give an employee direction which has the ultimate effect of making them redundant. So we'll run through some of the new stand down provisions which apply to employers and employees on JobKeeper that allow an employer to give a direction around reduced hours and days. An employer can give this direction so long as, for the period of the stand down, the employee cannot be usefully employed because of changes to the business due to COVID-19. So how do you know if an employee cannot be usefully employed? Well, the situation arises when an employee has no useful work available to perform because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Useful work does not have to be the work that the employee ordinarily performs, but it does need to be genuine, productive work that provides a net benefit to the employer. It's also really important to note that if an employee is stood down as a result of JobKeeper direction, then they will continue to accrue leave entitlements as if the direction to stand down had not been given. And for the purpose of their continuity of service with your business, the period in which they are stood down does still count. In terms of annual leave, we've included some FAQs around how JobKeeper interacts with this. So when can an employer direct an employee to take paid annual leave? Well, an employer can request a JobKeeper employee to take paid annual leave, provided that the employee will maintain a paid annual leave balance of at least 2 weeks. And the employee cannot unreasonably refuse such a request. There are avenues to go down if an employee does refuse such a request, and the Fair Work Commission could settle a dispute about this by arbitration. If an employee is directed to take annual leave, then the payment for the annual leave is based on the rate of pay that applied to them before the JobKeeper legislation operated. So we did cover off this question in our previous webinars, but it is a really relevant one to our industry, so I do want to run through it again. If you have stood down an employee, are you able to direct them to do work for you? Well, the answer to this is no, you cannot direct them to do work for you while they are still stood down. However, if circumstances change and you decide that you can now usefully employ them, and we spoke about the term usefully employed just earlier, you can take them off stand down. So you may seek to utilise the new JobKeeper enabling stand down provisions, which allow more flexibility in terms of a reduction in hours. So let's run through some of the JobKeeper directions that revolve around altering duties and days of work. When can an employer alter an employee on JobKeeper's duties of work? Well, on JobKeeper, an employer can direct a JobKeeper employee to perform different duties to normal, provided that the duties are within the skill and competence of the employee. They are safe to perform, particularly in reference to the spread of COVID-19. The employee holds any necessary qualifications or licenses to perform the duties, and they are reasonably within the scope of the business's operations. In terms of a JobKeeper employee's days and times of work, an employer can request that a JobKeeper employee perform their duties on different days or times compared to their normal days of work, again, provided that it is safe to do so, particularly having regard to the nature and spread of COVID-19, and that the performance of those duties on those days is reasonably within the scope of the employer's business's operations. An employee cannot unreasonably refuse such a request. So say, for example, you had an employee who usually worked part-time in your agency on a weekend, but you will now be closed on a Saturday and Sunday due to the lack of work because of COVID-19. The employee could reasonably be required to work weekdays as your business is no longer trading on weekends as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I also wanted to address some of the questions that we've had from members around compliance with JobKeeper. So what will be done to ensure compliance? Well, this program will be subject to ATO compliance and audit activity. there will be a positive obligation on employers to establish their eligibility and that of their employees too. In addition, the ATO will cross-check payments with Services Australia data and data from other government agencies and undertake activities designed to identify multiple or ineligible payments to individuals. And so what impact does JobKeeper have on workplace entitlements and obligations? Well, employers must continue to comply with their obligations in the Fair Work Act. The JobKeeper payment does not remove any workplace protections for employees. Enforcement in relation to Fair Work entitlements will continue to sit with the Fair Work Ombudsman, and enforcement and compliance to ensure that the JobKeeper payment is passed on to employees will be done by the ATO. And lastly, what is the government doing to ensure that companies do not manipulate their turnover to ensure that they can comply? Well, the ATO will provide guidance to help businesses self-assess their eligibility and will include integrity rules to prevent employers from entering into artificial schemes in order to get inappropriate access to payments. And there are some really great websites to visit, including the ATO website, business.gov website, and the Treasury website, where there's some really helpful content around JobKeeper. And again, I'd encourage everyone here to visit the Fair Work website and to familiarise yourself with the temporary changes to the Fair Work Act. So I hope that this has been a little bit helpful, and Jo, we might have some time for some more questions perhaps.
Great. I'll have a look and see if anyone's got specific questions they want around today's topics raised. So we have a question from Michael. Hi, Michael. Thanks for attending so many webinars with us. A really great question. Michael's just wanting to confirm if others have had contact from the ATO. Courtney, perhaps you can talk to AFTA's. I know that we've registered.
Yeah, happy to. So we have registered. We had our first text message not long after we opted into the scheme, and just yesterday we had another text message from the ATO with a JobKeeper payment update. Now that the legislation has passed, they were updating us that the Australian government has now introduced the JobKeeper payment. ATO has advised that there is no need for us to call them, and they will be in contact with us in due course.
Thanks, Courtney. Have we had any feedback yet from government around maternity leave?
I haven't really seen that question at the moment, and we haven't had any clarification, but we're happy to put that question to the business liaison unit as well.
Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, they haven't really clarified that as yet, have they?
Not as yet.
Great question from Andrew, Courtney. He's wondering if an employer needs to pay $1,500 less tax or $1,500 after tax.
It's the gross payment to the employee is $1,500 per fortnight, and then you withhold tax from that amount.
Thanks, Courtney. I'm just reading through a couple of other questions, so bear with me. Okay, a question from Christine, and we did touch on this, Courtney, but perhaps you can clarify. Are two directors that work for the same business and both draw a wage, so pay PAYG, able to both claim the JobKeeper?
Yeah, okay, so in terms of a company director that and their eligibility, an eligible business can nominate only one director to receive the JobKeeper payment, as well as any eligible employees as well. And only one person in a director capacity can receive the payment, and that individual may not receive the payment as an employee. So if you're in a situation where there's a business with other directors, then there'd be other avenues to look at, such as the job seeker and coronavirus supplement.
Thanks, Courtney. Even if someone is a director, could they get it as an employee instead? Or you're saying no, only one of the directors? Have I just confused you?
No, that's okay. So only one person in the director capacity can receive the payment, but they cannot receive the payment as an employee.
Got it.
However, if there's an, yeah.
Okay, I hope that answered your question, Christine. I'll just read a couple more questions. Let me have a look here. Oh, fantastic. Debbie has just made a note that the form is already available for employers on the ATO website. And a question from Maya just asking how we communicate with the Commissioner for when we're required to make lodgements.
Yeah, so all of that would be on the approved form that the ATO will issue, which it sounds like it might be available right now. We'll jump on and have a look at that after this webinar and see if we can then start to communicate some more information to our members as well.
Fantastic. And no doubt, given they are communicating with everyone via text message or email, no doubt they will provide more information to you with the details that you registered when you registered for JobKeeper. Okay, another great question here from a sole director that does not have any employees. They wish to confirm that they can still apply for JobKeeper.
Yeah, so anyone who's self-employed is still eligible for the payment. At the time of applying, so once the ATO sends out the form that they need with the information that they need to determine your eligibility, it'll be a matter of estimating that your turnover has fallen by 30% or more. You'll have to provide your ABN, and you will also have to include an amount of accessible income for the 2018 to 2019 year, including a tax return and TFM as well.
Thanks, Courtney. A question here by Karen, who just wishes to clarify superannuation, Courtney. If you're only paying the $1,500 per fortnight, then do you have to pay superannuation? And in this case, regardless of whether the employee was previously earning less than $1,500 per fortnight or more.
Okay, so if the employee is still working for you and they have not been stood down, and you're paying them $1,500 per fortnight, it will depend whether you're topping that payment up or not. So you would have to continue paying superannuation, the superannuation guarantee, on their normal wage up to $1,500, and if that is above the $1,500 per fortnight, you would have to continue paying superannuation on that. However, if they would not normally earn up to $1,500 per fortnight, and you are topping up their payment with the JobKeeper payment, you're not required to pay superannuation on that gap amount.
Perfect. Thank you, Courtney.
I hope that was clear.
If not, just type in the question box. Let's have a look at a couple of other questions here. There's a few good ones here, so just cleaning them out. Erica from MTA, so obviously a travel advisor, has received, which is great news, the ATO SMS with a link to the forms to fill out. Now, she's a sole trader, so she's asking if she fills out the forms in employer with the employee with the same name. So I think, Erica, you would fill that out under your ABN and under your trading name. So as a sole trader, it's most likely to be in your name.
Yeah.
Let's have another look. Okay, just there's a few juicy ones here, so let me just have a look. Oh, great. Anne's just made a comment that the ATO advised yesterday there's going to be more information coming for sole traders. So we'll be sure to send that around as well, because we know that many of our members are sole traders.
That's great. Thanks, Anne. And it's really great. I mean, you know, we really appreciate our members feeding to us this sort of information too, because it helps us reach out to the ATO and find out what we can to make sure that we can get it across the board. So I really appreciate that update, Anne. Thank you.
Hey, this is a great question from Deb, always throwing us good questions. I'm not actually sure we know the answer of this yet, Deb, and we'll come back to you. But Deb's question is, can the JobKeeper payment be paid if someone is receiving the new childcare free rebate? Courtney, perhaps one to add to the to-do list.
I've only seen questions around child support, a little bit of FAQ around that. I haven't seen anything in relation to the childcare rebate, which was only recently announced. So we might have to dig a little bit deeper, Deb, and come back to you on that one.
And just to clarify for Jackie around leave, has just said, so leave continues to accrue at the normal rate of work over the 6 months. So that would be a yes. Correct, Courtney?
Correct. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to clarify on that, if you've got a full-time employee and you have reduced their hours and they are receiving JobKeeper payment, you would be accruing their leave based on the hours that they are working for you. So it would be based on their reduced hours, and then if at some point they were to revert back to a full-time employee, their leave would begin to accrue based on that full-time salary as well.
And Courtney, just looping back to the comment you made earlier around GST, there are some questions in here, and of course we do know some of our members are nervous because at the moment the requirement says that you need to register, or it's going to be based on GST. Can you just give some reassurance that you think it will be okay?
Oh, look, I can't make any promises, but I can certainly assure that Jason and myself will be going directly to the BLU. You know, this eligibility test, it wasn't set out to leave anyone in the dark, and it certainly wasn't set out to leave the travel industry out of being eligible for this. So we are going directly to the business liaison unit, and we will make sure that they're aware that the GST rule, it just doesn't work in the travel sector, and we'll certainly loop back with our members and with an update on that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Courtney. I don't think they intentionally went out to set these rules. It would have just probably, let's say, a little bit naive because they're trying to think of all businesses, and this probably just fell through the cracks. So by bringing it to their attention.
No, you're exactly right. And the BLU unit, the business liaison unit, they require industry organisations to bring these sorts of issues to them so that they continue to work on the policy around this. So that's something that we'll certainly bring to them this week, and we'll loop back with members once we've got a concrete answer. Thanks,
Courtney. Just a question again on having stood down as staff. Carolyn is asking, how do you still acquire leave, and what is the level or amount? So it would be as per normal employment arrangements, wouldn't it, Courtney?
It is, yeah. If you've stood down an employee, they continue to accrue their leave entitlements based on the original employment arrangements that you had with them.
Okay, bear with us, guys. I'm doing my best to read, digest, and feedback questions. Okay, Lisa, we've answered this, but Courtney, Lisa's just said if a husband is the director and a wife a casual worker in the company are both eligible for JobKeeper. So one a director and one a casual worker.
Well, yes, provided that the casual worker meets the eligibility rules of being regularly employed for at least 12 months. But in that instance, then yes, one could apply as a director and one could apply as a employee.
Thanks, Courtney. Okay, I've got a great comment from Margaret to share with everyone that sole traders need to register, if they haven't already, with a MyGovID prior to completing the ATO forms. So sole traders should get a text message asking you to create your MyGovID, and then you actually need to link that and register for the accessibility through the authorization to manager. So they will send you a text message with the details. And in fact, my husband's a sole trader as well, and he did this the other day. So thanks for that comment, Margaret.
Thank you.
Question from Rhiannon, can you still get JobKeeper if you're getting family tax benefit? Again, Rhiannon, I think this is something we'll need to loop back to you on.
Yeah, you're right. We might have to dig a little bit deeper on the family tax benefit, and we might loop back with you, I think.
Again, a question from Johnny. Again, I think we've answered this, but the travel agency, let me just digest this. The travel agency with employee, whether one of the directors without regular wages eligible for JobKeeper payment. Johnny, you might just maybe retype that question for me.
Yeah, so an eligible business can nominate just one director to receive the payment, as well as any eligible employees. However, only one person in a director capacity can receive the payment, and that person cannot also receive the payment as an employee. So there's no doubling up in that sense. But you can have a director and then employees too.
Thanks, Courtney. Okay, another superannuation question, and this is just putting it into practice. So if the normal wage is $900 and you're only paying $750, is the super to be paid on $900 or just the $750?
So I think they must mean $900 per week and $750 per week. I'm going to guess. So let's say it was $1,800 per fortnight that you were paying your employee, and the JobKeeper payment was the $1,500 per fortnight. You would be required to pay superannuation on the full amount of the $1,800 per fortnight that they're working for you.
Thanks, Courtney. So I think it's also, we provided some really great examples in the previous JobKeeper webinar. So it's worth rewatching that or downloading the presentation slides and actually going to those individual examples, because you can apply them over your business. I think that's probably best.
Mm-hmm.
Just bear with me while I read a couple more questions, guys. I've got a question from Tony here, Courtney, around are there any issues paying weekly rather than fortnightly? And I assume this comes down to a commercial choice that you make as a business owner.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There wouldn't be any problem in the way that you pay your employees. The JobKeeper payment will be paid monthly to you, and then how you then determine how you pay your employees is completely up to you, so long as you're paying the correct amount to them.
And I think the other advice, if you're not 100% sure with your business structure if you're eligible, that's where I recommend that you would talk to your accountant who can help advise you. And also take that act of registering, because the ATO recognises that everybody's scenarios are very different, and you will be contacted and asked for the necessary paperwork, and then it's over the hands of the ATO in your business to determine eligibility.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me just see a couple more questions. I'm trying to look for questions, guys, that are quite general in nature around the topic. I won't answer anything that's specific to your own business scenario, because, again, I think that's something that you need to talk to your accountant about. Courtney, Trinity's asked a question here as an owner-manager. What if staff had agreed to take leave without pay where leave is not accrued? Trinity, are you asking if that's ethical or legal? The recent update at fairwork.gov.au is a really fantastic resource, and it provides a whole lot of scenarios and examples. So following this webinar, I'll send around the recording, I'll send around the presentation slides, and I'll also send around that Fair Work link. So definitely, as an owner manager, make sure you take the time to read that information.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Jo. We've just put a little bit of a snippet on here in terms of some key questions that we've had from members. But as I mentioned earlier, really encourage you to visit the Fair Work website. There's a lot of content on there, but it's actually quite easy to understand. And it will be able to sort of direct you into what you need to do now that the legislation has been passed with JobKeeper Payment.
Thanks, question. And I think, Courtney, and I think the final topic I'll just ask on is around long service leave. Firstly, is it classed as the same as annual leave, and in that it still accrues while someone stood down? And then secondly, can you ask staff to take long service leave? Is that
Look, you can certainly ask. Look, we've actually reached out to the BLU to get a little bit more clarification on long service leave specifically. We've found a lot of information on annual leave and personal leave, but there's certainly no legislation that or any reason that you can't ask an employee or request that they take long service leave.
Okay, thanks, Courtney. I think we might leave it there. There are a lot of questions in here that are very specific to everybody's own circumstances, and a couple of questions in here that I can also see we answered in previous webinars, so please do revisit those. And just to look forward at the rest of this week, we have 3 more fantastic webinars. Tomorrow, being a short week, we have 2 webinars. In the morning at 11 a.m, Naomi, who's head of compliance and membership, is going to give an update on cancellation and refunds. Then in the afternoon, back by popular demand, we have a mental health webinar, and I do encourage everybody to join that. It was absolutely fantastic. It's a great way to reframe the current situation, to take time out and look after ourselves. And then on Friday, Jason's going to do his usual weekly update at 2 o'clock. And no doubt in this, he'll touch on JobKeeper and rent relief. So everybody, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you, Courtney, for taking us through all that information. I know it was a lot of work reading, digesting, pulling that together. So we really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks everybody. Please, as Joe mentioned, feel free to reach out to us. We are here for you, and we'll certainly do everything that we can to help assist you with the JobKeeper payment.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, everybody.